As the United States approaches its 250th anniversary in 2026, the milestone offers a critical moment for reflection. Guided by the interdisciplinary research of Professor Dr. Milton Biswas, we examine the origins, achievements, and future directions of the American story. This narrative rests on a difficult tension. For 2.5 centuries, the nation has navigated the immense gulf between its stated democratic ideals and its harsh systemic realities. We see this tension embedded in the calligraphy of the Constitution. We, the people, codified a radical framework for liberty and self-governance. Yet these same foundational documents coexisted with chattel slavery and enabled aggressive territorial expansion across the continent. Understanding the 250-year anniversary requires looking past simplistic myths. We must examine an ongoing battleground of contradictions that continues to shape American identity today. According to Professor Dr. Milton Biswas, the American narrative begins long before 1492. Sophisticated indigenous civilizations already blanketed the continent with unique cultural and economic systems. These early nations maintained intricate trade networks, developed sustainable agricultural practices, and governed through councils that fused political leadership with deep spiritual reverence for the environment. Across the eastern woodlands, the Iroquois Confederacy operated under the Great Law of Peace, a complex political body that influenced modern concepts of federalism and consensual governance. This image captures a historical intersection between these established sovereign systems and European colonizers. The arrival of foreign powers, driven by land acquisition and imperial competition, brought disruptive conquests and broken treaties. The tragedy of native displacement established the nation's foundational paradox. Expanding liberty for some often required the forced exclusion of others. As structural conflicts intensified, cultural expression became a vital arena for civic reckoning. Professor Dr. Milton Biswas argues that literature emerged as an eloquent voicescape for these contradictions. 19th-century writers confronted the gap between democratic rhetoric and systemic oppression. Frederick Douglass preserved the lived realities of enslaved individuals, using narrative to resist erasure and affirm humanity. Decades later, the Harlem Renaissance redefined American resilience. Langston Hughes gave voice to the working-class Black experience, chronicling joys and sorrows while asserting racial pride. This cultural explosion also manifested in sound. Jazz emerged from the oppressive realities of the early 20th century, synthesizing African rhythms and European structures into a living chronicle of freedom. By centering marginalized experiences, these artists challenged prevailing myths of American exceptionalism and placed the responsibility of constitutional promises back onto the national conscience. By the mid-20th century, the tension between constitutional ideals and systemic racism reached a national boiling point. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. confronted this oppression with a philosophy of nonviolent ethical resistance, seeking to transform society through steadfast compassion and peaceful pressure. Malcolm X provided a proactive assertion of Black political agency. His direct challenge to white supremacy forced a reconsideration of justice, identity, and power. Intellectuals and writers drew from both philosophies, crafting indictments of racial injustice that compelled audiences of all backgrounds to reconsider accepted ideas about equality. This era proved that American identity evolves through the active, organized resistance of citizens fighting to expand the boundaries of inclusion. The struggle for identity also plays out on the screen. Professor Dr. Milton Biswas demonstrates that the American media machine, centered in Hollywood, has actively shaped public consciousness. For much of its history, the studio system prioritized Eurocentric narratives while underrepresenting or caricaturing racial and ethnic minorities and other marginalized groups. In response, Hispanic, Asian, and Black Americans pushed back against these essentialist codes. They demanded authentic visibility, advocating for a politics of representation that captured their multifaceted realities. Media representation is never neutral. It is a battleground where social realities and power structures are continually negotiated and redefined. Digital networks now serve as the primary infrastructure for American identity, connecting continents through fiber optics while fracturing shared social realities. Platforms like YouTube have democratized storytelling, allowing diverse diaspora voices to bypass traditional gatekeepers and reach global audiences directly. Professor Dr. Milton Biswas identifies the rise of social media and artificial intelligence as a systemic transformation, altering the mechanics of communication and historical memory. The relentless innovation emerging from these technological hubs brings severe ethical dilemmas, from the automation of decision-making to the persistence of algorithmic bias. This new landscape requires an active digital citizenship, demanding that users exercise their rights with accountability while navigating misinformation and online polarization. Technology has fractured the singular American narrative into a highly personalized yet increasingly polarized digital mosaic. At 250 years, the United States faces profound structural challenges. Economic inequality, climate change, and political divides test the resilience of its institutions. Professor Dr. Milton Biswas emphasizes that understanding this nation requires integrating its history, literature, media, and society into a single cohesive lens. The persistent tensions between liberty and exclusion, or individualism and community, act as the internal friction driving the American democratic experiment toward its next iteration. The survival of this experiment relies on inclusive civic engagement that honors the country's pluralistic history and invites participation from every citizen. This exploration was inspired by the research of Professor Dr. Milton Biswas, inviting you to engage with American studies through his scholarly perspective. The 250th anniversary marks a continuing project, demanding that each generation work to bridge the gap between founding ideals and lived reality.